When you're young, you don't have much power, do you? You don't have a job to earn money, you can't drive anywhere, you don't handle the grocery shopping. When you're a kid, your parents decide what you can have and when you can have it. They're the people who do have the money, who do have the car, who do buy the food. As a kid, your parents have sole access to and control of the resources you need, and as a result, you have to ask for things. A lot. That seems to be my kid's current default, asking. And asking, and then asking again, and maybe even asking another time, sometimes all within an hour. In fact, they are absolutely shameless when it comes to asking my wife or me for anything. Their requests are nonstop. They always seem to be waiting and asking for something. But here's what's interesting about asking. When we become adults, we tend to ask less and less of other people. Part of this is due to the reality that as adults, we eventually get jobs and earn money, which gives us more control and autonomy. But I think something else changes as we grow older, and it's something very different than what my kid exhibits. We become self-aware. We realize that constantly badgering someone is probably ineffective and definitely annoying. We ask someone for something, and since they heard us the first time, we stop asking. Honestly, I think that same mentality creeps into our relationship with God. And a lot of us feel uncomfortable repeatedly asking God for something. We don't want to seem like the 10-year-old who shamelessly asks over and over and over again. But there are other reasons why we may feel uncomfortable asking God for things. When it comes to our want list, it can feel less spiritual to continue asking God for a job, a date, a new car, or a new smartphone. Ultimately, we don't think these things are very important because they're not spiritual. We wonder, why should God care about our little concerns? Doesn't God want me to give up all of my material desires and say, it's just you that I want anyway? Forget my other wants. I just want to worship, praise, and adore you, God. And you know what? We should want that. But doesn't God also love the material, physical world? After all, He was the one who made it. He made relationships and work and the ability for us to create stuff out of all the raw materials He provided. God is not opposed to us wanting stuff. Jesus Himself made it abundantly clear that our Heavenly Father wants us to ask for what we want. He tells us to ask for our daily bread, for food, shelter, jobs, and healing. He takes pleasure in giving good gifts to His children. It's not unspiritual to ask God for all kinds of things. We should never feel bad or convicted when we ask God for the temporal, physical things we desire. Those things can sometimes be just as important as the so-called spiritual things. But for most of us, it's not that we think it's wrong to ask for our desires. Instead, we often don't ask because we find it tiresome. We hate to ask over and over for things because after a while we ultimately begin to feel as if we aren't being heard. Or maybe we feel like we're bothering God. Or we start to feel stupid. And then after asking and asking and asking and not seeing an answer, we get mad or frustrated and eventually we give up. It's difficult to ask for anything over and over and over again. It's painful when God seems to be silent and annoyed because let's face it, that's what happens in parenting sometimes. We don't want to be that squeaky wheel in God's ear. We know that pestering someone is not good for any of our relationships, so why would we do that with God? I understand why you feel this way. I've felt this way too. But over and over in the Bible, we find verses that tell us the exact opposite of our assumptions. Verses that tell us that He values our asking so very much that He wants us to continue to ask, to not stop asking. But why? Why does God want us to keep asking? It can't be so that we will eventually get what it is that we want. We know that's not the reason. It can't be the reason. Too many people have prayed and not gotten what they asked for. Too many people have prayed for parents to get together, for friends to be healed, for brothers and sisters to come home, for the job, for the promotion, for the house. And what happened? Well, a lot of them didn't get what they prayed for. So we know our perpetual asking isn't some kind of game that God plays with us. He's not trying to trick us into asking long enough and right enough before He will give it to us. Well, that's not it. So what is it then? Why is it important for us to keep asking? Well, what if continually approaching God and asking of God was something that God loved, even desired for us? We've been talking about a man in the Bible named Job for the last couple of weeks. Job was described as being a good, honorable man who suffered great hardship. And while he suffered, God seemed silent. Now, right here, I think it's a great point in our discussion to consider why Job felt confident to keep asking of God. You see, Job held onto the notion that it was good to ask of God. but I desire to speak to the Almighty. Job desired an audience with God, and he knew God was listening and leaning in to hear every single word. So Job refused to stop asking. He desired to bring his request over and over to God, so much so that it annoyed his friends. They were furious that he kept asking God for an answer. They kept saying things to Job like, "Who are you to bother God? Who are you to ask God for such things?" I think that Job felt confident to continue to ask of God because he was confident in the nature of God. He was confident in who God was. Job kept talking to God because he knew his asking was based on a love relationship. Job's friends based their understanding of God on religion and fear, a belief that God seemed unapproachable. But even thousands of years before Jesus walked the earth, Job knew that God was close. He knew that God was near. And in what I consider the pinnacle of the entire book of Job, he said these words, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Job knew that he had a redeemer, a restorer, a rescuer. The word redeemer in Hebrew is goel. A goel referred to someone's next of kin who would intervene to maintain the rights of a person or to help preserve their family line. A goel would avenge a murdered family member or redeem someone sold into slavery or buy back a lost family property to keep it in the family or even marry a widow to provide for a deceased husband. The most memorable use of this word in the Bible is in the book of Ruth. Ruth is a young, poor girl, and Boaz, the next of kin, marries her to preserve her family, which is the most honorable, loving, and selfless thing to do. Job knows this about God, that God is his redeemer. His love is with him, and Job knows that if God is his redeemer, then God must be for him. And that gave Job the confidence to ask without fear. And knowing that about God enabled him to ask in complete safety, because when someone is for you, that builds confidence. Instead of God being bothered by the asking, maybe he actually wants it. Maybe it's actually a way of being loved and showing love. You see, your relationship with God is based on love, and the ultimate measure of God's love is seen in the gift of Jesus. It's what we call the gospel, which means good news. It's the unbelievable good news that God came to earth for you. And if you can remember that, you will have the confidence to keep asking God for the things you need. You will never fear him, and you will never tire because you know he will never tire. You keep showing up because God showed up for you in the most ultimate way. When we are on hold and find ourselves waiting, it feels as if God's love is on hold. But the truth is this: God's love is never on hold. If we can remember the gospel and the ultimate value that God places on us, we will know how much he loves to hear from us. We don't know if Job ever got answers to all his questions. We don't know if his prayers were ever fully answered. My guess is he stopped asking God for those answers. But here's what we do know. God became so much bigger to Job. At the end of the story, we discover that God blessed Job even more in the second half of his life than in the first. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Nowhere in all the land were there found women as beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father granted them an inheritance along with their brothers. After this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his children and their children to the 4th generation, and so Job died an old man and full of years. Job experienced so much growth, abundance, and influence. We don't know how long it took for God to answer Job or for Job to experience restoration. But the point of it all is that eventually, Job did see his life restored. And in the waiting, God was with him. And God will do the same for us if we let him. We can allow a season of being on hold to build our confidence in God's love for us instead of dispelling it, if we believe that God's love is never on hold. When you feel like you're on hold, don't stop asking. Is there something in your life that you've been waiting on, that you've been on hold for? What has it caused you to believe about God? What has it caused you to believe about how God feels about you? I want to encourage you to not give up. Keep asking, but ask with the confidence that God delights in your asking. Your relationship with God grows with every ask, and remember, God's love is never on hold. Life will always consist of managing the tension between the asking and the waiting. But the waiting part doesn't negate his love for you. I mean, God is a huge God who also cares about the details of your life. Yes, he made the mountains, but he also cares about your job. Yes, he holds all the storehouses of snow, and yet he holds all your relationships in his hands. And while he thought up the expanse of the universe, he still thinks about everything that you want as well. This God loves you, and this God is for you. And as you're on hold, don't ever forget and don't ever stop asking. And don't ever stop believing that he is right there with you, wanting to hear everything you want to ask him.